front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Put your mouth. OK.
Here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Good evening. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The government has rejected claims that Britain's aircraft carriers cannot be sent to the Middle East because of a personnel shortage. RAF jets made a round trip of more than 3,000 miles from Cyprus on Thursday to take part in a series of strikes on Houthi positions in Yemen. Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron has warned the UK may intervene again if attacks on ships in the Red Sea continue. There have been reports that a recruitment crisis is preventing the Navy sending aircraft carriers to the region. But Defence Minister James Cartledge says that's not the case.
There is no truth whatsoever in the suggestion that we cannot deploy the carrier. I'm pleased to confirm both our carriers are in Portsmouth, they are at readiness, and they are available to be deployed if needed, if the operational decision is that that is the appropriate response.
Well, in the last few minutes, Houthi rebels have said they've seen a US aircraft flying close to Yemeni airspace. We'll, of course, update you on any developments on that as we get them. The former Home Secretary has attended a rally marking 100 days since the October 7th massacre in Israel. Suella Braverman was among a crowd of thousands in London's Trafalgar Square, calling for the release of hostages still being held by the Hamas terror group. Many people held posters showing those who are still missing. Others were seen waving Persian flags with a sun and a lion in the centre, representing opposition to the Iranian government. 5 migrants are now known to have died trying to cross the English Channel overnight. French officials say up to 70 people got into difficulty while trying to board a boat in darkness off a beach just north of Boulogne. The incident happened near Wimereux at around 2 a.m, triggering a major emergency response. A further 2 migrant boats arrived in UK waters this morning, with at least 100 people taken to Dover. Police investigating a plot to disrupt the London Stock Exchange have now arrested 6 people. It's alleged that activists from the Palestine Action Group We're intending to target the London Stock Exchange tomorrow morning. In the early hours of this morning, officers arrested a 31-year-old man in Liverpool on suspicion of conspiracy to cause criminal damage. A further 5 people, all believed to be part of the same plot, have also been arrested. Now, snow and ice warnings have been extended across the UK as the country faces an Arctic blast. The new warnings cover the whole of Scotland, as well as parts of Wales and England, including Newcastle and Manchester. Up to 10 centimetres of snow is expected in the north of Scotland today, and it'll be a similar scene in Northern Ireland tomorrow. The freezing temperatures are forecast to move further south over the course of next week. Roads and railways are likely to be disrupted. And finally, Denmark now has a king, with Frederick X taking the throne. He succeeds his mother, Queen Marguerite, who formally abdicated after 52 years as monarch. The king, his Australian-born wife Mary, who's now queen, and their children waved to huge crowds from the balcony of Christiansborg Palace. King Charles and Queen Camilla have sent their best wishes. Those are your top stories on GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying Play GB News. Now over to Free Speech Nation.
A social worker wrongfully suspended for saying sex is real wins her tribunal. Elon Musk bans the word cis. And parents in Scotland could face up to 7 years in prison if they don't affirm the gender identity of their children. This is Free Speech Nation. Welcome to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. This is the show where we take a look at culture, current affairs and politics, and we're going to have the latest from those lovable culture warriors. We're going to stay up to date with what they're trying to cancel so you don't have to bother. Coming up on the show tonight, we're going to be speaking to the author of a report which condemns the current police policy on strip searching as, quote, state-sanctioned sexual assault. And we're going to be hearing about the case of Rachel Mead, a social worker who was vindicated by an employment tribunal this week after being suspended from work due to her gender-critical beliefs. And is the Home Office a hotbed of chaos, dysfunction and wokery? We're going to be speaking to a journalist who spoke to a series of department insiders. And the author and philosopher Peter Boghossian will be here to discuss the controversy over the resignation of Harvard President Claudine Gay. And, of course, myself and my fantastic panel will be answering questions from this rather delightful studio audience. My guests are Cressida Wetton and Josh Howie. Hello, both. You're looking very spruce. Josh, what is it?
I've dyed my beard.
That's what it is. I knew there was something going on.
Because I've got an audition for a 18-year-old.
No, it's working.
Thank you.
It's working. And very gangsterish, the kind of...
Well, this is because I was hosting over Christmas, and so I bought this suit, and to make it tax deductible, I've got to wear it 2 more times.
Oh, right, OK. Well, if anyone from HMRC is watching the show, they can now see that all is well. And what about you, Cressida? Have you had a good week?
I haven't been dyeing my hair ever.
No.
Have I dyed my hair this week? No, not this week.
That's why it's so grey.
It's not a competition. Anyway, I've had a good week. I've been in America.
Very nice.
I saw a manatee in the flesh. I don't know if you've seen these beasts, but they're quite incredible. They just sort of float around. They're just big lumps, basically.
They don't look very comfortable, but they look very body positive.
They're very body positive beasts. Anyway, so let's get some questions. We've got this fantastic audience. It would be a shame to see them go to waste. And there's lots happening this week in the world of the culture war. So we're going to start with a question from Vanessa. Vanessa, hello.
Is cis a slur?
So this is a question. I've actually had discussions with many, many people about this. Cis or cisgender, this is a term that trans activists use about people who do not identify as trans. Vanessa, do you think it's a slur, just out of interest?
Of course it is, Andrew. We're not a subset of our own sex class, are we?
So you don't need to be called cis women?
No, we don't. We all know that humans can't change sex, I think, and...
Isn't that funny? That was a controversial thing to say.
Well,
there was actually a bit of an audible gap.
Funnily enough, Andrew, I'm a social worker as well, so it's particularly topical for me.
Of course.
Used to be. Used to be a social worker.
I think this is really important because, you know, certainly the way it's used a lot of the time, and the way when it's been used against me, and the way I see it used against women online, is very much a kind of it's aggressive, isn't it? There's a toxicity to it.
Is.
Now, Cressida, have you ever had an activist go at you online and call you cis?
I haven't, but you know what has happened? I was at a comedy gig once, and the comedian asked for a scary situation, and somebody in the audience put their hand up and said, having to speak to a cis white man. And that was just acceptable, you know.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
So, when did it become acceptable just to throw in people's race or...
Edinburgh 2022, apparently.
I guess. So I suppose I should explain for people who don't know, because actually some people still don't know what this term is. I'm so immersed in this culture war that I know what it means, and a lot of people don't. So in other words, cisgender or cis is a word that activists use, and the actual definition is when your sex, your biological sex, does not match your sense of gender identity. So, Josh, I would argue that the word is incoherent in all cases, even if activists are using it, because most people don't have a gender identity. Most people don't believe in a gender identity. Yeah. So if you're saying, well, your gender identity doesn't match your biological sex, therefore I can call you cis, that actually doesn't make sense even on its own terms.
Totally, but it makes sense in the sense of... And here's Norm Macdonald, who one of the best comics ever, who died a few years ago, and he called it out even before then. So,
really?
And he said it's a way of marginalising a normal person.
Right.
And that's what it is. And it's a way of people spreading their ideology. So I've never had someone trans call me cis, but I've been called cis by a bunch of other cis people trying to stamp their religion onto me.
Yeah.
Oh, you're a cis person, and that's what they're trying to do.
It is one of those markers of a religious belief, basically, isn't it? And it's funny how a lot of people just use it, and they've taken it from these activists and they think it's acceptable to use. I don't think it is. And Elon Musk, I mean, this story, Vanessa's asked the question because Elon Musk has said on Twitter, and there's the tweet, that cis is a slur, but he specifically said it's a heterophobic slur, and I don't think that's right. I think it's a slur, but I don't think it's got anything to do with sexual orientation, actually. So I think he's kind of got the definition wrong, but he's on the right track, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, because you can subscribe, you can be a heteronormative person and still subscribe to the idea,
Right.
which, by the way, I don't think makes sense, because if you believe that trans women are women, the end, no debate, you wouldn't need another word, would you? I've never understood that.
Yeah, I think it's what Vanessa was saying, that, you know, it's creating a subset of, like, there's trans women and cis women. That's the division that activists would like you to believe. Actually, there's just women and people who identify as women who aren't women.
Yeah,
I think that's fair enough, isn't it?
But no other group would demand that everybody else defines themselves by not being in that group.
No, that's
Does that
right.
make sense? So I'm Jewish, but I would never expect you to go around...
You called me a Gentile the other day.
And in that case, behind closed doors, it's totally fine.
It's a different thing, yeah. No, that's right, that's it. Although it is interesting, because I remember a gay activist back in the day, I mean, I must have been in my early 20s, and I read this gay activist's essay, and he was referring to straight people as non-gay. Or, yeah, now that's never going to catch on, is it?
I don't mind you calling me non-trans.
OK, non-trans, non-gay, and you're what are you, non-woman? Non-man.
I'm definitely a non-man, yes, yes.
It's very confusing, actually.
I like this non-man thing.
Yeah. OK, well, let's move on. We've got a question from Catherine. Hi, Catherine. Hello.
Is Calvin Klein objectifying women?
I presume you're talking about the advert, which... Yeah. Well, let's have a look at it. I think we've got the image of the advert, and this was with a model called FKA Twig. Josh Howie!
You really like that shirt.
Josh Howie. It is a great shirt. So the ASA, the Advertising Standards Authority, has banned this advert. That's the... Oh, no, sorry, she's a singer, not a model. FKA Twigs. Is that a real name, do you suppose?
No.
In the musical world.
I doubt it.
No, OK.
Yeah.
Is it a nod to Twiggy back in the day? Is that
Oh, I don't know. I thought the letters stood for something that I now can't remember. I don't know.
OK.
I'm out of touch.
We clearly don't know enough about this singer. But
Felicia.
anyway, it's Felicia. So that's an image. Are they right to ban it, I suppose, is the question. Does it offend you, Catherine, when you see images of scantily clad women?
No, that didn't offend me.
No, it doesn't offend you.
No.
But it has offended the Advertising Standards Authority. Cressida, I suppose I should come to you first on this. I know Josh has done some modelling of that kind. But you are a non-man. As a non-man, do you think...
As a non-man.
Actually, wait a minute. Do you remember that? What was where there was a policy coming from one of the universities talking about defining lesbians as non-men attracted to other non-men? And that was actually authentic. So I made it up as a kind of joke, but then I remembered actually that's real life, yeah.
This is
in
there somewhere.
This is the problem, is real life and comedy just blend. Anyway, back to FKA Twigs.
Well, I mean, yes, was the question, have they objectified women? Yes, obviously, but that's not news, is it? So it's like we've just finally hit a boundary where they've decided... I think that the rule was something like the advert focuses more on her body than it does on the clothes. I mean, fair enough. But it's fascinating to me that they found a line and said, no, that's as far as we'll go. Because if you go and look at any adverts of women in underwear, they're quite revealing, aren't they?
Well, you wouldn't wear the shirt in that way, to be fair.
No, I wouldn't.
So it's bad advice. Just in terms of fashion.
Terrible. Have they seen the weather? I mean,
yeah, exactly. She's going to catch her death. I feel very sorry. Now, Josh, the thing about that is, I think about Calvin Klein adverts, and I think they all objectify people, don't they? I mean, I mean, the ones for men are not exactly, modest. It's not like they're dressed in full kimonos or something.
I've done a few Calvin Klein ads.
I know.
And
I wish you wouldn't.
But no, it is ridiculous. But you also have to look at the product that's being advertised. So if you're advertising underwear, you have to see the underwear. She's not advertising underwear. She's advertising a shirt, and so I guess it becomes about percentage of flesh. Now, technically, if it was about percentage of flesh you can reveal, I'm actually, with being bald, revealing more than Cressida at the moment.
Are you being sexually objectified, or do you feel
all the
that
time?
way?
Yes, very much so.
Yeah.
And I'm fine with that. I've got over it now. But
I'm so used to it.
I'm so used to it. But there is something. There's a weird flip of. Of the sort of feminism, the sort of unintended consequences. That rule that they're basing it on, in terms of being a sexual object, was brought in by feminists to stop the sexual objectification unnecessarily of women.
Yes.
Right, and now she's saying, but wait a minute, you're taking away something from me, so that this is my narrative, this is how I want to represent myself.
Yes.
So it's a weird flippage now where that rule is being used to stop a woman.
So wait, let me just clarify. So FKA Twigs is very happy with this poster.
She loves it.
And she's very proud of it.
She's blown it up in her bedroom and everything.
Right. Well, that's such an old, weak argument, isn't it? Women with a small w or women in general. Obviously, she's personally benefiting. That doesn't mean it's good for, teenage girls.
Do you think it's bad for teenage girls to see that thing? And I would ask as well, do you think it's bad for teenage boys to see, back in the day, I think Marky Mark did a Calvin Klein out, and it full-on six-pack, very tight briefs.
It's probably bad for the average straight teenage boy to see that, because then they think women are made of this kind of unbelievable goddessness. Most women don't look like that.
But wait a minute. When you walk around Florence, for instance, you see statues of naked individuals.
Yes.
No one looks like that either. No one looks as good as Michelangelo's David or the Venus.
No, that's true. Well, another thing they objected to in this advert was her facial expression, which I thought was interesting. Because, I mean, none of us would want to victim blame, obviously, but they're implying that the way a woman presents herself might have some relationship with the way people perceive her.
Right.
Which is generally quite out of fashion, isn't it?
OK. Well, this is very complicated.
I think they should put some Calvin Kleins on top of Michelangelo's David.
Oh, yeah,
and then see how sexy that is.
That's a great idea.
OK, great idea. Let's see if they do that. They won't. OK, let's move on now. Although you say that, the Vatican did put a fig leaf on Michelangelo's David a little over 100 years ago, so, it's already been done. Everything we joke about tonight will actually be true. That's the thing. OK, we're going to move on to Alan. Where's Alan?
Evening. My question is, was the US and the UK correct in bombing the Houthi rebels?
And, of course, they've launched this attack on Houthi targets in Yemen without a parliamentary debate. It had to be done very, very quickly. Alan, do you have any thoughts about this?
Yeah, I think they were correct to do so. I want to be in the plain press and the button given the chance.
And
we have problems of terrorism all around the world.
Yes.
We have to show a strong hand when it's needed.
And particularly when it comes to the blockage of ships in the Gulf. I presume this is in the Suez Canal.
It's just their actions and the fact that they can change the world, the way the world operates.
Yes.
I think people's lives are far more important than if you can get your oil or products through the canal.
Yes.
An extra week or two on the shipping is.
Well, they have to go all the way around the Africa.
Yeah, it adds to it, but it's just the fact that terrorism seems to be raising its head more and more, and I think we need to actually address it and address it quickly.
So I suppose we're talking here about appeasement, aren't we? And this seems to be the case when we're talking about various terror organisations. And I don't think we should be in any doubt about this. I mean, the Houthi flag has the phrase "Curse the Jews" written on it.
Death to the West, death to America.
Death to America, death to Israel. Now, and the thing about this is a Shia militia group, something like 20,000 strong, who are doing no favours within Yemen either. Let's not forget.
No. I mean, they've got child soldiers. They are a bad group of individuals, and they attacked British and American warships.
So why
you have to have a response
am I seeing placards on pro-Palestine marches being very advocating the Houthi rebels?
Because these are the stupidest people in the world.
Well, that's a very...
It feels, like they haven't thought it through.
You're hearing these chants from the Yemen to what, they love a little chant on those Palestinian
marches. But do they know anything about it?
No, but all they know is that they want to kill Jews, so they must be the good guys.
I mean, that
is literally what it comes down to.
I mean, it is shocking. It's interesting because the Houthis, I believe, are not a prescribed terror organisation, and therefore it is legal to glorify, to have the sign. So they can do this, I suppose, in a way that they have to be a bit more cautious when they talk about supporting Hamas, which I know some do. But they know not to openly support it, right?
They've gotten very good with their code words and their little tricks.
Yes, exactly.
From the river, but at the same time they're incredibly obvious as well. So.
Yeah. What do you think, Cressida? It's
a
no-brainer, right? This is a terrorist group who are very dangerous, and
Well, or like you say, appease them, see what happens. Yeah, let's go with that for 6 months and see if it gets better. Maybe they'll just start being nice. I don't know.
But no one ever suggested let's appease ISIS.
No.
I mean, for some reason, why? I mean, I don't see the difference, really.
I agree. Nobody suggested appeasing ISIS, but I feel like the people who are in favour of this, they just haven't thought it through.
No.
It's like you just don't know anything.
It's very reminiscent of the TikTok trend. Do you remember a couple of months ago where a lot of young people they just discovered the Osama bin Laden letter that was published in The Guardian, because Osama bin Laden is a well-known Guardian writer. It was on his CV, so, and they started saying, oh, you've got to read this letter. He was right all along. And you think, what? I don't understand what's happening at that point.
Because they're contrary to the West. We are talking about murderous jihadists who want to destroy the culture that we live in. It's crazy. Today was 100 years since October. 100 days since October 7th, when the genocide in southern Israel by Hamas, and there was a sort of vigil today, a solidarity stand with Israel.
Yes.
And it was like totally different to the images that came out yesterday on the marches. Someone there calling, like on the microphone there yesterday, calling for...
To normalise massacres.
Normalise massacres. The one day we finished on the UK, the national anthem.
Yeah.
Because we're proud of being British, and there's a massive discrepancy.
There is a massive discrepancy, and it's very, very sinister, I think, what's going on. And it's getting worse, isn't it, from what I can see?
Yeah.
But anyway, we will no doubt be covering this a lot more as the weeks go on. OK, next question is from Tremel. Hi.
Yes, hello.
Have I pronounced that right?
You pronounced it correct.
Perfect.
My question is, are children starting to look old?
Are children starting to look old?
He's 10, by the way.
He's only 10 years old. Right, now, this is an interesting story. I only read about this today. Leading dermatologists, they're saying that they're worried because a lot of kids, as young as 10, are asking their parents for anti-aging products. This is a social media trend, right? So this is I mean, Cressida, were you using it? Is this why you look so good? You were moisturising as a baby?
You're so kind, Andrew. It's mad, isn't it? I mean, a bit of sunscreen, fair enough. Although, when I was a kid, we used to get sunburnt and nobody really said anything. I know that's not fashionable.
I think that's actually important. Sun cream is different.
Yes, I'll give you that. That's the special one. But not... Is it retinol is one of these things that I think... I genuinely don't know.
So what's that? Are toddlers getting Botoxed?
Well, I don't know about Botox, but things that come in pots that shouldn't be on the... Lewis Schaefer's got a rule, our lovely colleague. He says if you can't eat it, you shouldn't put it on your skin. I don't know.
I'll have to think about that.
The point is, children, A, know they don't look old. How could they possibly? And B, they shouldn't be concerned with these things. I mean, if a 10-year-old comes to you and says, I think I need to get some work done, that's...
Well, I mean, look, it's actually not a million miles away. When I joke about Botox, but there are some 18-year-old girls who are using Botox, younger.
Yeah.
I don't get it. I don't
It's crazy. Look, my daughter's 7. She's very happy that she looks 6.
Yeah. And she's done a lot of work, and it's paid off, though, in her case.
But they stop looking human, or the traditional standards of beauty, which have changed now. So you've got this strange generation who sort of freeze their face or slightly alter it. And what you've got now is a strange phenomenon that's also included in this article, which is about how millennials look younger now than Generation Z.
Yeah.
Because millennials sort of did the right stuff and have kept healthy and eaten well.
But they don't drink most.
And they don't drink, and whereas Generation Z, they're
very boring.
The vapes and whatnot. So you've actually got it's a very strange phenomenon where you've got these kind of 18, 19, 20-year-olds who could be anywhere between 18 and 40.
Yeah.
Now it's bizarre.
I do think it's a bit. Look, I'm for individual freedom. If you want to do whatever you want to your body, I think you should be able to do it. I think you should have Botox, as much Botox
I
as you
don't
want.
believe in individual freedom for children. I think that's a
what
terrible...
I was about to say that, Cressida. You're trying to make me look like I'm supporting Botoxing babies in the womb. And I'm not.
Great.
They are very wrinkly when they're...
They are, to be fair. They need a bit of work. OK. Anyway, next on Free Speech Nation, the Women's Rights Network think the current policy regarding strip searching by police amounts to state-sanctioned sexual assault. Kathy Larkman has written a report about this. She's going to be here to discuss it. Don't go anywhere.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel. Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News. To Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. A report carried out by the Women's Rights Network says the majority of police forces in England and Wales allow trans-identifying biologically male officers to strip search women. At least 34 out of 43 forces have either implemented the policy or intend to. This all stems from December 2021, when the National Police Chiefs Council approved a policy paper proposing that officers be permitted to strip and even intimately search suspects of the opposite sex if the officer self-identifies as the same gender as the person being searched. Retired Police Superintendent Kathy Larkman authored the Women's Rights Network report entitled State-Sanctioned Sexual Assault, and she joins me now. Welcome to the show. I want to ask you first about the title, State-Sanctioned Sexual Assault. People watching will think that's quite an alarmist title, that's quite shocking. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Well, I don't think it is alarmist. I think it's a very accurate title, Andrew, to describe what's happening here, because this is the first instance at the very highest level that police chiefs, the chief constables of the forces of this country, have mandated an action which isn't, in fact, the law according to the legislation they're supposed to cover. So they've actually mandated the fact that, you know, people can strip search the opposite sex.
So the law is that that cannot take place, that a police officer cannot strip search a member of the opposite sex. But the NPCC are saying we should ignore the law effectively and think in terms of gender identity, not biological sex. Is that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it's important to say this isn't the first time. They've sneaked this in below the radar before in 2012 for prisoners in custody to self-identify who they wanted to search them.
Right.
So whether they wanted a policewoman or a policeman to search them. They sneaked that in the legislation, the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. But in December 2021, they made a decision at the highest level to allow that to happen for pre-arrest searching. So you could be stopped and searched on the street, and you could be strip searched or given a more thorough search. The law says that should be an officer of the same sex.
Yes.
But
Well,
they made
sense.
the decision that you can self-identify. From the moment you self-identify, that officer can do it to that member of the public.
It just seems extraordinary because, you know, if you are a suspect, not even someone who's been arrested, but a suspect can be searched. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it's important to bear in mind there are around about 500,000 stop searches carried out in this country every year. A proportion of those will be strip searches.
Yes.
Only about a quarter of those will end up being arrested, you know, males and females, children as well. This affects, you know, you regardless of your age as well. And a strip search it's extremely humiliating and degrading. You know, I have carried out strip searches. I have supervised strip searches. They can easily go very, very wrong. And you have to bear in mind the dignity of the person. The law says it must be an officer of the same sex.
Yes.
So as well as the person being searched, just think of the policewomen, you know, and policemen as well. But obviously I'm particularly speaking about policewomen there are tens of thousands of them in this country who have had no voice in this decision.
That's fascinating. I mean, you're a retired superintendent, so when you were working with the police force, had this come in at that point? Would it ever have crossed your mind that this is something that the police could do?
I suspect, and I know from the policewomen that we speak to and the police officers we speak to, that they are not fully informed in relation to this. You know, police chiefs really have sort of sneaked this in on them. They certainly haven't consulted them.
Yes. It seems to be a broader problem. The NPCC, but also the College of Policing seems to be sneaking in these kind of ideas. People are going to be surprised, though, because surely bodies such as the police chiefs and the people who train the police, the College of Policing, they should know the law, shouldn't they?
They absolutely should know the law, and they should be complying as well with their own internal ethical code.
Yes.
They're totally failing to do that. You know, they're here to serve the public and police with consent. These are really, really important principles for policing in this country. They're failing to do that. And if you read the policies, the policy that was approved by the National Police Chiefs Council, it's entirely saturated with gender ideology phrases that have no place in the law of this country. Self-ID is not the law in the UK.
And it's interesting, the NPCC has removed the guidance from their website. What does that signify?
Well, I think it signifies they're rattled because, you know, lots and lots of women particularly, but men too, have, you know, raised an almighty storm in relation to this. And obviously the Women's Rights Network report has landed very, very hard. Within 2 days, that was raised in a Home Affairs Select Committee hearing with the policing minister and received, you know, a lot of attention as a result. So I think they are rattled, but we shouldn't take too much comfort from that. You know, there shouldn't be a celebration. There shouldn't be a party that they've somehow removed this. They've stated they are reviewing that guidance, but the forces that have implemented it have already changed all their policies. So until such time as they pull their policies and they stick to the law of the land, then the situation still remains.
It does strike me that, you know, they'll say we'll revise our policy, but they've done this before with other issues. There is a perception that the police in England and Wales have a very partisan view when it comes to debates around gender identity ideology, and in particular have even been accused of targeting and harassing women with gender-critical beliefs. So this is... Am I right in saying this is really deeply embedded in the police service?
Oh, the roots are very, very deeply embedded, and we know the frustrations of police officers and police staff who are telling the Women's Rights Network directly of their frustrations and their fear as well of speaking out in relation to this as well. You know, they're exasperated with the way the policing is going.
And how has the response been to your report?
The response has been excellent. You know, that report wouldn't have been possible without numerous women at a grassroots level making that happen via letters, emails and Freedom of Information Act requests.
Yes.
You know, and they have made that possible. It should not be down to individual women to make our police forces change and listen and comply with the law of the land, but yet here we are.
Yes, so if it wasn't for these people just asking questions again and again and pushing back, the police would be perfectly happy to just push this through. No one would ever know, in other words.
No, and exactly that. You know, this has been going on, as I said, for, you know, after arrest, for people in custody to self-identify since 2012, and that's been highlighted in previous reports.
Yes.
But since December 2021, there was a significant expansion, so not only for prisoners to self-identify, but, you know, obviously people prior to arrest to self-identify, and for police officers to self-identify as well. And another thing, Andrew, from this is the stated intentions of this policy is to attract more individuals to the police service who identify as the opposite sex. I just say for a moment, just to reflect on that for a second, you know, this is actually being waved as a carrot, the opportunity to strip women naked and search them, you know, as a, you know, an enticement to employment in the police service. What does that say?
That's very interesting, because a lot of people say, oh, well, people who are concerned about single-sex spaces, they're always suggesting trans people are predators. But, of course, what you're suggesting there is this opens a loophole to people who are predatory. Not that trans people are inherently predatory, but that people will exploit predatory people will exploit loopholes that are available.
This shouldn't be rocket science to the police. You know, we deal, well, I still say we, deal with safeguarding all the time. You know, it should be the very first concern for both the police and other organisations as well, and yet, on this occasion, it clearly isn't.
Well, you're from the Women's Rights Network. Can people look at that online? Is there a website or something?
Yes, we have a website. The report is available on there as well. And I'd ask everybody, you know, if you can have conversations with your, you know, your local police chief, your MP, you know, please do so.
Fantastic. Kathy Larkman, thanks so much for joining me. And next on Free Speech Nation, we're going to be discussing the case of Rachel Mead, a social worker who was completely vindicated this week by an employment tribunal after being suspended from work due to her gender-critical beliefs. Don't go anywhere.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GBNews. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GBNews. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Newsread. Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. Now, social worker Rachel Mead this week won her case that Westminster City Council and Social Work England discriminated against her when she was suspended for sharing gender-critical views. This is a real landmark case, and I'm going to be discussing this today with two guests. I'm joined from Glasgow by Michael Foran, a lecturer in public law at the University of Glasgow, and here in the studio by the family law barrister Sarah Phillimore. I'm going to come to you first. Michael, can you give us some background to this case and why it is so significant?
So Rachel Mead is a social worker. She'd been working with Westminster City Council and been regulated by Social Work England for 20 years. She had a private Facebook account that had about 40 people as friends on it, so only those 40 people could have access to the posts that she made. Over the course of a year, when the UK government was soliciting feedback from people about potential reforms to the law on gender recognition, she posted a few posts, including posts calling for reform to the law in relation to men who identify as women in prisons, or particular posts in relation to males and female sports. She had a member of her Facebook group identify these things as extremely offensive and made a complaint to Social Work England.
So one complaint was all it took for her to be suspended and investigated and at least now acquitted. Can you just fill us in, Michael, where does the law stand on this? Is she not entitled to post her private opinion about the need for single-sex spaces on her private Facebook page?
Oh, more than that. I mean, she's entitled to voice these opinions publicly. She's entitled to voice these opinions in her place of employment, so long as it doesn't constitute a breach of the employment law that she'd be subject to. I mean, what happened here was this was a woman who was voicing a political view on one side of a political debate, who was subject to an egregious example of harassment. I mean, it's really shocking, I think, that this case even got to where it got. I mean, a potted plant would have won this case. This was an open and shut example of harassment. So, yeah, it's not just that she can voice these views privately. She's perfectly entitled to, under her human rights, to voice them publicly as well.
Well, I'm going to bring Sarah Phillimore in on this because I'm struck by this. I spoke to Toby Young from the Free Speech Union recently. They're taking on so many cases like this when gender-critical individuals post something and then they're harassed by their employer. I know that the Free Speech Union helped the fundraiser for Rachel early on. So why are more and more people having to do this? Why are employers not realising that there's laws against this kind of thing?
It's very curious. It shows that I was naive about lawfare. I thought that all we needed was a few big wins and we'd stop this in its tracks. We had those big wins with Maya Forstater and Harry Miller, both in 2021. But Maya
Forstater's case, we should say, that established in law that to say that there are two sexes and that you cannot change sex, that is a protected belief.
It's worthy of respect in a democratic society.
Right.
So that overturned the first instance decision, which said it wasn't. So I thought, hurrah, in my naivety, we've done it. We can all get back to business. We can get back to focusing on our time and energy on really important things. I was utterly naive, because what has happened is, I suspect, with the input from lawyers who are guided more by ideology than understanding of the law, employers, organisations are simply ignoring those cases. I represented Rachel in the Fitness of Practice Tribunal hearing. I was shown a statement of case from Social Work England dated July 2022 that said a gender recognition certificate changes a person's sex as a matter of biology. Now, I asked the tribunal to make it very clear that this was wrong, and not only was it wrong, the Employment Appeal Tribunal in Forstater had set out in a number of paragraphs why that was wrong. A GRC creates a legal sex, nothing more, and that legal sex can be disapplied when it's for a legitimate and proportionate aim. So it was quite clear that Social Work England and those advising them had not bothered to read the key judgment. And having embarrassed themselves and withdrawn from opposing a sanction on Rachel, then Social Work England and Westminster continued in the Employment Tribunal, and we've seen the outcome of that.
That's so interesting. Michael, can I ask you about that? Because I think what Sarah's alluding there is this idea that there are activist lawyers attempting to misrepresent the law. Have you found this?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, it's a very strange area of law, because it's very rare that you would have barristers or solicitors or people who work in this field be willing to misrepresent the law like this. But the only explanation is that these people are either incompetent or they're misrepresenting the law. And I think, you know, what we're seeing here is a real, I think, culture war that's happening that's resulting in particular activist lawyers. And I don't normally like the phrase activist lawyers, but in this context, I think that's the only way that you can describe how some people are behaving here. Because, yeah, as Sarah says, I mean, this case shows that the lawyers here just either didn't understand what the ruling in Forstater said, or were purposely trying to get an employment tribunal to overturn or ignore a decision of the Employment Appeal Tribunal. Which they
and that's incredibly worrying. But Michael, surely, I mean, I often think of lawyers constantly are arguing about the meaning of the law, how the law ought to be interpreted. So what's different about this exactly?
Well, I think in this context, I mean, there are circumstances where there are reasonable points of disagreement throughout all of the law here. But for example, the claim that the Forstater decision only protects belief, but doesn't protect your ability to manifest your belief, to speak about your belief, to voice your belief, that is just flatly incorrect in law. And no lawyer who knows anything about religion or belief discrimination would ever make that kind of claim. What we would say is that there are certain circumstances when manifestation is not protected. But what happened in this case was that the tribunal was abundantly clear that that does not apply to merely voicing the views that Rachel voiced or to expressing support for the causes that she supported. And in fact, we had, I think, a really important ruling from this tribunal that said Social Work England and Westminster City Council describing her voicing of those views as transphobic itself constituted harassment. So it was an act of harassment to describe what she said as transphobic, because the law is quite clear that she's perfectly within her rights to express those views, and those views are not transphobic according to the law.
So, Sarah, just finally then, I mean, it's perfectly clear that the judgment in this case has even gone so far, as Michael says, to say that this was a form of harassment. So surely this should put an end to it now, shouldn't it? This isn't going to happen again?
I wish I could believe that, but I note what was said by Sarah Newman, the Chief Executive of Westminster City Council. There was a recent article in The Times. Another social worker from Westminster has come forward to say that there is a culture of fear about raising issues when they're presented with children who are gender incongruent. And Miss Newman said, no, nothing to see here. We don't have any of these cases, and when we do, we investigate them thoroughly. Somebody this morning sent me screenshots of a blog that she'd written talking about her trans-identifying stepson wearing dresses. I think Helen Joyce has made this point, and it's a good one. A lot of the people pushing this, I think, are motivated by their love and concern for people who are near and dear to them, which is very understandable. but it doesn't help the rest of us who are then subject to what are clearly unlawful and discriminatory policies.
But surely Sarah Newman must accept the judgment of the court.
Well, you say that, Andrew, but Social Work England managed to dodge that by not even apparently reading the judgment in Forced Starter. I think I heard Cathy say to you, the roots of this go very deep. They do, and I'm afraid the deep roots bring with it a deliberate turning away from what the actual law is, aided and abetted by a small cabal of activist lawyers who will reassure these people, of course you're right. There's no right to manifest these disgusting beliefs. They must stay in people's heads. People were still saying that after Forced Starter, and I'm afraid my money is on they will continue to say it after Mead, and we will not have seen the end of these cases.
Wow. Well, Sarah, I have a feeling we'll have to have you back on the show because this isn't going anywhere soon. No. Michael Foran and Sarah Fillmore, thank you both ever so much. And next on Free Speech Nation is the Home Office, a hotbed of chaos, dysfunction and wokeness. We're going to speak to a journalist who spoke to a series of department insiders in an attempt to find out. Don't go anywhere.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
to find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. So, are government efforts to curb migration being hampered by chaos and dysfunction in the Home Office? Well, that's the conclusion drawn by Telegraph journalist Stephen Edgington, who spoke to a series of department insiders for an investigation. And Stephen joins me now. Welcome to the show. Stephen, you've been talking to whistleblowers, department insiders. What's going on in the civil service?
Well, this article aimed to answer the question, why has immigration, both legal and illegal migration, why have those numbers sort of skyrocketed in recent years? Why has there been record numbers coming to Britain? And I looked into the Home Office and I think I found
a fair amount of kind of answers to that question. The one man who has been consistent at the Home Office for the last 3 years, there's been 5 Home Secretaries, is the permanent secretary at the Home Office. Now, he is the most senior civil servant, Sir Matthew Rycroft. He was knighted in 2023. He is a career diplomat. He used to work for Tony Blair. He became an ambassador. He was a representative at the United Nations. And he was quoted on record saying last year that he sees himself as a diplomat and temporarily to be at the Home Office. So some people say his heart really isn't in the job. He's also the civil service so-called race, faith and belief champion. Now, it's a bizarre situation that you've got the most senior person in the Home Office, the department that is controlling our borders, but also our police situation as well. He also spends time discussing matters around diversity, HR, transgenderism, Islam, faith across the entire civil service. So he has presided over some significant failures in his department, and yet he is also focusing on these, I would describe, woke issues.
Is there a suggestion that whatever government policy might be implemented, that the Home Office might attempt to thwart it for ideological reasons?
I think there are some civil servants who definitely would want to do that. And I've spoken to lots of people inside the department, both civil servants, former special advisors, current special advisors, ministers and people like that, who say, well, yeah, there is of course, a sort of undercurrent of people, unfortunately, who use so-called yes-minister-style tactics to undermine the government. However, at the same time, we can't let ministers off the hook. It is their responsibility to push forward policies that will cut numbers, for example, on immigration, on legal immigration. And unfortunately, for the last few years, we've had ministers and prime ministers who have been unable and refused to take those actions that would lead to those policies. So I think that the blame in terms of, to answer my original question, why are numbers so high, the blame is partly on the civil service, but I think most of all, it is on ministers and on various prime ministers that we've had in the last few years who have simply decided that the situation in terms of uncontrolled numbers is perfectly fine because we need to help various sort of businesses with cheap labour and things like that. So they made those decisions, and I did hours and hours of phone calls, lots and lots of investigations, writing this article. I've been working on it for quite a while, actually. And I think the ultimate conclusion I came to in my head was actually the most amount of responsibility in terms of the numbers, both illegal and legal, should be held on ministers, not on the civil service.
Yes, but if they're facing pushback from civil servants who are not fulfilling their role to be non-partisan, shouldn't the government also be dealing with them?
They should be, and I think that some ministers try and deal with these things inside their various departments. The problem they've got is that they're constantly fighting fires, there's constant chaos, there's constant dysfunction. So what you've got in a situation like the Home Office, you've got about 10 or so ministers and SPADs, their special advisors, versus 35,000 civil servants.
Right.
So how are they meant to be on top of all these civil servants and have oversight over those people? It's completely impossible. And as I say, every day there's a new crisis, so it's very, very difficult to reform these institutions.
OK, well, very interesting. Stephen Edgerton, thanks so much for joining me. There's plenty more come on Free Speech Nation tonight, including some questions from this fantastic studio audience. We've also got the philosopher Peter Boghossian here to talk about Claudine Gay and the Harvard scandal and diversity, equity and inclusion. Is it almost over? See you then.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, good evening. I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. We have a very cold week ahead of us, and that starts with Sunday night. Temperatures are set to plummet quite widely as skies clear. Any cloud across England and Wales drifting its way into the Channel, and underneath those starry skies we will see a widespread frost developing. Even in our upbuilt urban areas, temperatures as low as -2 or -3 degrees Celsius. With those frozen surfaces and showers pushing into the north, there is the risk of some icy stretches for Northern Ireland, Northern Scotland as we start off Monday morning. So do take care here when you are heading off to work. Best chance of seeing any snow on Monday is those regions exposed to the northerly winds. So again, at Northern Scotland, Northern Ireland, maybe some sleet showers for the west of Wales, southwest England, and a few snow showers skirting coast of Yorkshire and down into Norfolk. But further inland, it is going to be dry with widespread sunshine, but still very cold. Temperatures only seeing highs of 1-2 degrees Celsius at best, feeling sub-freezing with those tight squeeze and the isobars down the east coast there. Our attention on Tuesday turns to this feature in the northwest. A change of wind direction to that northwesterly could bring some snow showers first thing in the morning to parts of northwest England. Then as this more organised area of rain moves its way in, we could see snowfall for northern central areas of Scotland and along on the Pennines as well. There's still some uncertainty in regards to the exact track of that system, so it is worth keeping up to date with the forecast. But the cold weather looks like it certainly will be staying with us throughout much of this week. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
There's plenty more still to come on Free Speech Nation this week, including the author and philosopher Peter Boghossian on the resignation of the Harvard president, Lois McClatchy-Miller on SNP plans to criminalise parents who won't let children change gender, and, of course, more questions from our brilliant studio audience for myself and my comedian panellists, Cressida Wetton and Josh Howie. But first, let's get a news update from Tatiana Sanchez.
Andrew, thank you very much. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. The government has rejected claims that Britain's aircraft carriers cannot be sent to the Middle East because of a personnel shortage. RAF jets made a round trip of more than 3,000 miles from Cyprus on Thursday to take part in a series of strikes on Houthi positions in Yemen. Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron has warned the UK may intervene again if attacks on ships in the Red Sea continue. There have been reports that a recruitment crisis is preventing the Navy sending aircraft carriers to the region, but Defence Minister James Cartledge says that's not the case.
There is no truth whatsoever in the suggestion that we cannot deploy the carrier. I'm pleased to confirm both our carriers are in Portsmouth, they are at readiness, and they are available to be deployed if needed, if the operational decision is that that is the appropriate response.
The former Home Secretary has attended a rally marking 100 days since the October 7th massacre in Israel. Suella Braverman was among a crowd of thousands of people in London's Trafalgar Square, calling for the release of hostages still being held by Hamas. Many people held posters showing those who were still missing. Others were seen waving Persian flags with a sun and a lion in the centre, representing opposition to the Iranian government. Here, 5 migrants are now known to have died trying to cross the English Channel overnight. French officials say up to 70 people got into difficulty while trying to board a boat in darkness off a beach just north of Boulogne. The incident happened near Wimereux at around 2 a.m. this morning, triggering a major emergency response. A further 2 migrant boats arrived in UK waters this morning, with at least 100 people taken to Dover. Police investigating a plot to disrupt the London Stock Exchange have arrested 6 people. It's alleged that activists from the Palestine Action Group were intending to target the London Stock Exchange tomorrow morning. In the early hours of this morning, officers arrested a 31-year-old man in Liverpool on suspicion of conspiracy to cause criminal damage. A further 5 people, all believed to have been part of the same plot, have been arrested. Snow and ice warnings have been extended across the UK as the country faces an Arctic blast. The new warnings cover the whole of Scotland, as well as parts of Wales and England, including Newcastle and Manchester. Up to 10 centimetres of snow is expected in the North Scotland today, and it'll be a similar scenario in Northern Ireland tomorrow. The freezing temperatures are forecast to move further south over the course of next week. Roads and railways are likely to be disrupted as well. And Denmark now has a king, with Frederick X taking the throne. He succeeds his mother, Queen Marguerite, who formally abdicated after 52 years as monarch. The king, his Australian-born wife Mary, who's now queen, and their children waved to huge crowds from the balcony of Christiansborg Palace. King Charles and Queen Camilla have sent their best wishes. Those are your top stories on GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by simply saying Play GB News. Now it's over to Free Speech Nation.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. Let's get some more questions from our lovely studio audience. Our first question from Judy. Judy, hello.
Hello. How much compensation should be paid to the victims of the Post Office scandal?
Oh, right. Well, this is obviously a huge story this week. Judy, thank you for that question. Now, Rishi Sunak is saying emergency legislation will be used to overturn convictions of more than 900 postmasters who were falsely accused of stealing from the post office. However, some postmasters face a further battle to obtain adequate compensation, with those who were forced to pay back large sums which were never missing in the first place, having now been offered just £75,000, despite in many cases having lost their homes, lost their livelihoods. Cressida, this is an absolute mess.
It really is, isn't it? I mean, on the one hand, Rishi Sunak did quite well,
but
acting quickly, and that's
Yeah.
right, 20 years later. But on the other hand,
well, better late than never, right?
Right. But
Yeah.
75 grand. I mean, it's a drop in the ocean.
Well, that's the point. Lives have been ruined here. And I spoke to Nick Wallace about this, who'd written a book about this a number of months ago. And it's great that it's finally all coming out and something's being done. But there's something about these kinds of miscarriages of justice that is just so infuriating.
Isn't it? Well, and it's just unbelievable, isn't it? If you just heard it, you'd think, it couldn't possibly.
Yeah.
How could you think 900 people had committed the same crime? It didn't smell right and all of this. But it happened.
Yeah. What is it? Just gullibility, incompetence? What happened here?
Yeah, well, I think it was actually went to the offence was greater than that, because it wasn't just it was that people knew that this system was wrong, and they still maintained that it wasn't, and they still prosecuted people. And that is...
So talk me through that. What's the mindset of...
Well, I think it just became this sort of... people try and protect themselves. They try and turtle up, and they hope it will go away, or hope that people won't pay attention. It just escalates further and further. They're deeper and deeper in.
Yes.
It's... and now here we find ourselves. But in fact, it's taken so long, as you say.
An ITV drama.
Yeah.
It feels like it would never have come to light if it hadn't been entertainment.
Yeah, no, that's right. No, sometimes it does take things like that to expose it. You know, incredible. OK, well, look, we're going to move on to a question now from Christian. Hello.
I love the show. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for the compliment.
Do we need more women to fight for us?
Well, maybe you do, Christian. I don't know. Well, this is to do with the story about Grant Shapps, the Defence Secretary. He says that the armed forces recruitment crisis can be solved by more women joining up. Cressida, are you ready for this?
Absolutely not. What he should do is he should get the 10 best-looking women and film them saying, I really fancy soldiers, and then see if the recruitment drive works out.
Now, that's an interesting approach.
Obviously, that's a very sexist opinion.
Very sexist. So, I mean, look, do you think he's just box-ticking here, or does he have a point? Is there underrepresentation, you know?
Oh, yes, there is, but there's also underrepresentation in bin collecting and bricklaying, and we don't see drives to recruit that. I don't understand the logic. It feels like it's politically correct. I don't know whether he genuinely thinks there's a pool of talent there that he can exploit.
Yes.
But it feels forced to me, and I can just see it being good for 5 minutes and then there being lots of dropouts from the scheme.
Yeah. I mean, is it not the case that men generally are drawn to roles that involve fighting more than women?
We like to say "pow pow" and things like that.
I mean, I don't think that's a sexist comment.
No. I was on holiday. I had like 2 days away, and I took a video of my 4 boys, and they were just beating the poo out of each other and just with pillows and this and that, and then cut to my daughter, and she's just like with a little doll and stroking it. These things are
but she's playing psychological games with the doll.
Oh,
manipulation and sort of gossip.
And she's the one who told them to all beat each other up.
Yeah, exactly.
If she wanted to beat them up, she'd be allowed. Nobody's stopping the minority of women who want to do this.
Yes,
what I'm arguing against is a drive to over-recruit.
Well, true, but in Israel they've got women much more represented because in the forces there are lots of roles that don't require physical strength.
Yeah.
In terms of on boat, radar or whatever it is.
But if it were the case, as in any industry, if it were the case that there was some kind of discrimination at play,
yes,
and that women weren't being recruited because someone within the echelons is saying we don't want women around, then I would oppose that. I'd say, come on, that's not right. But that's not what's going on.
No, but there is an argument that there is a rape culture, whether it's a former rape culture going on there.
In the military.
In the military, that needs to be still somewhat dealt with, possibly still have... Now, I can't speak to... I'm not in the military, so I can't speak to how those views are still represented or not. But I think that that's also partly what he's arguing against, is this idea that could be a barrier to women.
That's interesting, although that kind of barrier wouldn't exist in some of the other examples you give. Bin collecting, oil rigs.
That's true. And also, I'm never quite sure what people mean by rape culture. I mean, I don't know...
I think lots of rape going on.
Well, and I don't know whether that's really happening.
Are you talking about the difference between, say, I suppose, what people call banter or particular
Yes, because banter serves a function. It's not just an accident and it's not just bad taste. It's something that happens between men in bonding that enables them to go to war.
But that can be quite off-putting for some people.
Yeah, and maybe that's appropriate. But I'm not... clearly, if there's criminal activity going on, no.
Yeah.
Boo. I think it's really... It just feels very headliney to me to say, oh, get the women in, they'll sort it out.
OK, well, there's a lot to unpack there. We don't have time, but I'm sure we'll get back to this at some other point. We've got a question from Gavin now. Hi, Gavin.
Good evening, folks. Did Cricket South Africa drop a player for being Jewish?
Very interesting question, Gavin. This was quite a shocking story I saw. This is a guy called David Teager. He's part of the South Africa under-19s cricket side. Now, Josh, he'd made comments about the Gaza conflict. Someone complained, is that right?
Yeah.
Is that what happened?
And they weren't, bad comments or anything, but the fact that he was Jewish was enough. And this is South Africa, and I believe that there is a name for when one ethnicity is discriminated against and has different rules. I can't remember exactly what it is. A path something. So, yeah, it's disgusting. And you're giving into hatred. And what examples does that set? It's disgusting.
But this wasn't really covered very much. But it does strike me as incredibly shocking. As you allude to, coming from South Africa, they should probably know better.
Well, look, I don't want to speak, but anywhere in the world, it's discriminatory. He has an opinion, it's a legal opinion, it's not a wrong opinion. As opposed to saying that Hamas rapists are the good guys or whatever? No, he put out some message of support for the IDF, who are fighting to get hostages, their own citizens back. Yes. And then he has now been pulled from that team.
It just strikes me, even if the opinions he were expressing were offensive in some way or objectionable, I don't think people should be punished for their views.
No, and they were investigated, by the way, and they were found not to be. The issue here was because of the security concerns. So you know what you do? You put on more security. Yeah. Otherwise, you're backing down to people who...
So in other words, they're punishing the individual because of security concerns, as in threats against him.
Yes.
Well, didn't we do the same... we had these debates when it came to the Salman Rushdie fatwa, and people were complaining about the security costs, saying that he brought it on himself.
And we failed that test then.
We did.
And we are now seeing the ramifications today. It's a slippery slope, and that's where we're finding ourselves, with Islamists on our streets emboldened.
Yeah, people don't... And we had this with Charlie Hebdo as well, with the magazine, the massacre at Charlie Hebdo. People were sort of saying they'd brought it on themselves. I mean, some people were saying that out loud. It's like there's absolutely no way that we should be siding with psychopaths with machine guns over cartoonists.
If you took this approach in domestic violence cases, it would be outrageous, wouldn't it? If you said, well, look at the way she cooked the dinner. I mean, you absolutely wouldn't get away with it.
To be fair, you don't really know my wife's cooking. But...
I thought you did most of the cooking, Josh.
I do. You're right. I do most of the cooking. Not to let her cook.
I think you make a very good point, though. It's victim blaming in sort of the classic...
If only we could behave our way out of terrorism. What are you talking about? No.
If we were just nicer.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's ridiculous.
Be kind to terrorists.
Be kind to terrorists, there we go. We're going to move on. Oh, don't clip that bit, by the way, if anyone's watching. That's not what we were talking about. OK, we're going to move on to another question from Caroline. Hi, Caroline.
Hi. Should we ditch fur?
Fur? Yeah, I mean, I've had a fair few arguments about this over the years. I'm a vegetarian. I don't eat fur, but nor do I wear it. More because I can't pull that off. It's too ostentatious. But this has flared up because Stephen Fry has said that the King's Guard should stop using real fur in the bear skin caps, you know, the big, the furry hats, which I think is their actual name. And these are obviously the ceremonial functions they wear. And he says they absolutely shouldn't do that. But Jeremy Clarkson has weighed in, saying, no, we shouldn't have hats made of nylon. There's a big argument about fabrics now. I mean, what do you think? Should the bearskin hats be made of actual bear?
Well, Clarkson makes the very surprisingly politically correct point for Clarkson that the bears are getting consumed somehow anyway, and that it's a byproduct. I don't think that's really the point.
So they don't hunt the bears specifically to make the hat?
Well, according to Clarkson, this is what I've read.
Yes.
But I don't know. It feels like what we're really arguing about is this kind of tradition and loving the past and not wanting it to be taken away and those kind of things.
OK, because I thought it was a military thing. I thought they had to wrestle the bear to death in order to fashion their own hats. And then the hat is like a marker of their...
We definitely need to keep them.
They need to keep them. Yeah, absolutely. What do you think?
This is not the hill I want to die on.
No. Go on, have a really controversial view.
No, I mean, what the army has said in response is that if they can find an appropriate alternative that has the same quality, then they'd be up for it. But...
aren't they cumbersome anyway? The shape of the hat. How do you get involved in a battle with a big towering hat on your head?
It's like headbutting people.
Oh, OK,
I don't know, but also they keep you warm. I guess they're standing around a lot outside.
And they make you look bigger, the way kangaroos sort of stretch themselves out when there's a predator.
But look, I'm happy to step in and shave my back hair and donate it to the...
I was wondering if you can make anything out of Jeremy Clarkson. I mean, that would be an interesting...
People have been trying for years. OK, we're going to move on now to a question from Leslie. Where's Leslie? Hi.
Hi. Should extreme pornography be banned?
This is interesting now. So this is a Tory peer, Baroness Boleyn, says that extreme pornography could be banned under the Conservatives. And they've been looking at the harm that is done by pornographic material. This is always... I mean, there's always been these debates, hasn't there? And it's this idea that pornography is the price you pay for a free society. Yeah. Do you remember when the Tories tried to ban certain types of pornography? It was about 15 years ago, and they came up with a list, and it was effectively the fetishes they didn't like or approve of. I mean, I'm not going to say any of the ones, but it was a weirdly specific list.
Well, that's the problem, isn't it?
And interestingly, a lot of the fetishes that they put on the list were things that involved mostly female pleasure. And you wonder whether
wow.
maybe there was a sexist element to this as well. Anyway, who the hell knows? But
women get pleasure from sex.
I'm afraid to tell you, in some cases,
okay.
yes.
Good. I'm learning so much from this.
This shouldn't be about your marriage. It really shouldn't. So, Cressida, what do we do about this? Because, you know, I understand people's concerns and the argument about extreme pornography can cultivate a culture of misogyny. On the other hand, a free society says that adults can do whatever they want.
Yeah.
Where do you stand?
It's so difficult, isn't it? Because I think extreme pornography is very dangerous. Louise Perry makes some great points about the ratchet effect. Once things are available to the population, she makes the case that some people have ended up becoming paedophiles who would never have got to that level of depravity.
Does she have evidence for that? Like, sort of, are there studies that would point to that kind of impact?
That's a really good question. Don't know. It must be 6 months since I read the book.
OK, fair enough.
But I accept her point that what she's worried about is the ratchet effect. So what I'm saying is, yes, I get it. It's really dangerous, and the more you've got, the more you'll get, and so on and so on.
Yes.
But we don't want the Tory party or anybody making a decision about what's appropriate.
But we're not talking about criminal stuff, are we? Because, you know, when you're describing... When they say extreme pornography, if you're talking about criminal stuff where people are hurt or exploited, that's already illegal, isn't it? We're talking about certain legal forms of pornography, right? That's
right. Sorry, it's just there's a loophole where you can... there's stuff that's online streaming that's legal,
yes.
But if you owned it in a physical form, it would be illegal.
Really?
And yes, because the British Classification Board has oversight of that, and that stuff would then be classified as illegal.
That's strange,
yeah. So I think that's partly what she's talking about here.
And what do you make of it? But do you think that the government should in any way get involved when it comes to censoring?
Well, I think I agree with what Cressida's saying in that this ratchet effect, in that... I think we need to go backwards. I've always said this, and people think I'm joking, but in terms of just bring back magazines. That's where I want to go.
Really? Why?
Yeah, because magazines have got to use a bit of imagination.
You have to buy... There's a sense of shame when you go and buy...
Well, and achievement.
Or
and
finding
testosterone is going
also
down.
finding...
And this is partly
It's
why.
easier to find magazines in a bush.
I did not anticipate the conversation going in this way, but...
That's what I'm saying. If I was in charge, I'd ban all of that stuff online and I'd bring back magazines.
OK. Well, it is just an interesting question about, you know, adults having the freedom to choose what they consume.
There's a line, but it's a slippery slope, excuse the pun.
OK. Was that a pun? I hope not. OK, we're going to move on now to a question for Armin. Where's Armin? Hello.
Good evening, everybody. Is Sadiq Khan's ULEZ the next postal scandal?
Very interesting. London Mayor Sadiq Khan, obviously we've all heard of the ULEZ scheme, we've talked about it a lot on this show, continues to attract criticism. It's designed obviously to ease pollution, help the environment, but it's been described as a war on motorists. Is it a war on motorists?
Well, the difference is we know about this, but then the similarity is lots of people are saying it might not work and it's going ahead anyway. So, I don't know, maybe it is. Maybe in 20 years we'll all be getting massive payouts.
Yes. Do you think it'll be a scandal, John?
No, I don't think there's any fair comparison to it. It's not a system that a policy I agree with, but to compare it to what's going on with the post office, which was, you know, people arguably behaving illegally to cover up actions as other people were sent to jail and various things like that. I think it's not the comparison.
OK. Well, let's get a question now from Roger. Where's Roger? Hi, Roger. Hello.
Good evening. Will the election result in Taiwan provoke China?
So this is obviously a big story. William Lai has been elected the next president of Taiwan, and this is a third consecutive term in office. He's part of the Democratic People's Party. Chinese government obviously won't be very happy about this. They've called him a troublemaker because he believes that Taiwan ought to be an independent, autonomous, democratic island. That is... I know that the Chinese government have said that I think they wanted Taiwan in their hands by 2025 was the date they'd put on it. This is going to be a real hub of international contention, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not looking
dangerous.
good for China. And they've got... Taiwan have got America's backing. And
yes.
I saw a lady from Hong Kong going over there to take photos and be involved in the sort of celebratory atmosphere after the election, saying we couldn't do this in Hong Kong. So, yeah, clearly the Chinese are looking at this. And,
but China is a major power. It does somewhat dwarf Taiwan. And, of course, if there was some kind of conflict here, America would, I suppose, be obliged to get involved. They've pledged to do so. Yep. I mean, this is potentially a seed of a major international conflict.
Absolutely. This could be World War III. I mean, that's why we have to talk about it. It is important.
Yes.
China seemed incredibly determined to get their hands on it.
Yes.
you know, it's the question is to what level are they going to take it? But yeah, I just thought it was funny they, you know, voted someone called William Lie as opposed to Bob Truth.
Well, Bob Truth didn't make it past the primaries.
Yeah.
OK, we're going to move on now to a question from Peter. Hi.
Hi there. Are the German farmers justified in their extraordinary protests?
I'm glad you mentioned that, Peter, because there hasn't been much coverage of the German farmers' protest, or not as much as I think there should be. Farmers in Germany blockading roads with tractors and various vehicles. They're protesting against subsidy cuts. I think it's more than 500 tractors and trucks by the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin, and they've completely brought Berlin to a standstill. They really can do this. Such is the power of protest. I mean, it's the kind of thing that you see in France a lot, but you don't often see in Germany. But a lot of people... Can I ask you about this, Peter? Because a lot of the media, and I've seen, for instance, an article in The Guardian trying to suggest that this is a great opportunity for the far right. Whenever workers protest, they always seem to invoke the far right, when the working class people are trying to fight for their rights. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, it's interesting, actually, that that there's now a 3-day strike in sympathy by the railway workers,
right? Okay.
Who are not strictly right-wing.
No, that's right. It's not really about right and left, is it?
It's not at all.
But it's often interpreted that way, isn't it?
Well, look what happened in Holland.
Yes.
You know, so this is really a follow-through from the
That's right.
From the
So
government.
there's a knock-on effect. This is going on, but I would connect it to broader mood like the Gilets jaunes in France. I would even connect it to the truckers in Canada, even though that was to do with COVID restrictions. This principle of working class people mobilising, having an effect when they protest, and then just being demonised and smeared as far right by various politicians. That seems to be the knee-jerk reaction now to anyone standing up for their rights, doesn't it?
It does, except I wonder if we're trying to crowbar this into that narrative, in that this is really more so an economic issue, where they're protesting a loss of money.
Was it not an economic issue in Canada? I think it was.
Well, the COVID restriction, you could argue it's a rights issue.
No, but they were also talking about their livelihoods.
OK, well, yeah, for me, I thought it was more of to do with... But yeah. So, and it is a real phenomenon of other people tacking on to discontent.
Yes.
You know, not saying that means everyone's far right or anything. I'm just saying that's what people do. The far left do it. The Socialist Workers' Party turn up at everything, but handing out their
That's going to happen at any
So
protest,
everybody exploits these...
So it doesn't make the protest invalid, does it?
No, not at all.
It's almost like...
Can I just come back to Peter, because he asked the question?
I suggest this may have more to do with control of food production.
Yes, yeah. OK, fine. What do you... Actually, let me just bring in Armin as well. Can I have the mic? Because, Armin, you wanted to make this point about... control of food production, about that particular point on these protests.
Oh, yeah, because you're seeing a lot of these farms being closed down as farms, and they're putting solar panels all over the fields and everything, which looks ugly in the countryside.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, the less food production we have, food prices are going to go up.
Yes.
And if the UK can be more self-sufficient and produce our own food, that also cuts down importing. And this is what we should be doing. We should be looking after ourselves, it's right, you know, in all those sort of ways. And the same thing's happening in Germany and Belgium.
Yes.
And of course in France, the EU are trying to put all of this green issue in. And at the end of the day, it's not realistic.
Yeah.
It's good for the dreamers.
It feels as though a lot of these environmental policies that are implemented tend to affect workers more than anyone else.
Yeah,
and they're told this repeatedly, but they're not listening. Maybe they listen when the roads are blocked.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. And of course, it's affecting people with everyday lives. And you can't have governments and local councils go against its people and residents. And this is what's happening more and more. You know, the residents in local towns are not getting their...
Very interesting, and I'm sure we'll be covering this again on the show because it's not an issue that's not going anywhere. But next on Free Speech Nation, I'm going to be joined by the author and philosopher Peter Boghossian. We're going to be discussing Claudine Gay's resignation as president of Harvard and what it means for diversity, equity and inclusion initiatives. Don't go anywhere.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I. So you want higher taxes? Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News.
Come on, more than that, more than
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. I've got a very excitable guest here, so let's crack on. Now, a huge story in America over the new year was the resignation of the Harvard president, Claudine Gay, who was forced out over accusations of plagiarism after her extremely unconvincing performance in front of a congressional committee when discussing anti-Semitism on campuses. Some commentators have portrayed her downfall as a blow for DEI, or diversity, equity and inclusion, policies designed to increase diversity in the workplace, or are they? Well, here to join me to talk about this is a man with his finger on the pulse of these issues, the author and philosopher Peter Boghossian. Peter, asking for love is never a good look.
Yeah, no, it is with this group. It is.
It should happen
We're
naturally.
good.
Peter, now tell us, Claudine Gay.
Right.
It's been identified, and she's been accused of plagiarism in her doctoral thesis. The response from various bodies has been to sort of protect her and deny it. The Associated Press said that plagiarism is now a weapon in the culture war from the right.
Correct.
What on earth is going on?
Correct.
Isn't plagiarism
Correct.
just wrong, full stop?
Correct. So plagiarism is basically taking ideas that are not your own and crediting them. And one thing that's so crazy about this story is she even plagiarized her acknowledgements. Like she plagiarized her thank yous. But it was. Here's the main deliverable to this.
Yeah.
It's not about Claudine Gay. It's about wide-scale, massive institutional corruption. Harvard, other institutions are now hiding dissertations so nobody can access those because they know that the problem is endemic.
Now, you think this is happening?
Oh, I know for a fact it's happening because I know people who are pulling the dissertations. And they're going, let's put it this way, I wouldn't be surprised if they went after Jill Biden, who has an EDD. They're going after everyone. I predict to you that in the very near future, the default will be, unless you can prove that your dissertation was not plagiarized, the assumption is it's going to be that you're a fraud.
Well, I mean, as you know, I mean, we both come from academic backgrounds, and we know that the one thing you just never do is plagiarise. You don't try and pass off other people's work as your own. If you have an idea that you want to take from someone else, you credit them for that and say that.
Correct.
But why would someone reach the position of president of Harvard, of all places, one of the top universities in the world, and not observe that basic rule?
Well, that's okay. Well, there are multiple answers to that question. One, she only had 11 publications, and for those who aren't familiar with academia, 11 publications is nothing. But even beyond that, we could talk about merit and whether she was hired because she was a black woman, which is things nobody wants to speak honestly about. But the problem is that the institutions themselves are complicit in the corruption.
Right.
And so she was found guilty of she was found innocent of an internal investigation of plagiarism before they even investigated. So they didn't even do the investigation, and they lawyered up. Their lawyers threatened the Post. They had stories retracted about the plagiarism. Barack Obama came to her defense, but it's not about Claudine Gay.
No.
This is a question of wide-scale corruption in an institution.
And
so many people have done this now.
Yeah.
Like, it is ubiquitous.
But clearly, people are seeking to protect their own for ideological reasons. You wouldn't see this kind of protection for someone who maybe had a conservative worldview within the institution.
No, but we don't have to worry about that or even think about that because depending on the department, the ratio of conservatives to liberals is like 98-1.
Yes, yeah.
But I mean, you could think about it, forget about academia, think about the fire department. Think about just like random, I don't know, whatever board or industry you wanted. If corruption was shown, for example, in the materials that it took to build bridges, why wouldn't you want to root out the corruption so people wouldn't die when they went over the bridges?
Right.
I mean, it doesn't even make any sense. But they're hiding, again, to pull the analogy further, they're hiding the fact that materials like bridges were made out of balsa wood or materials that couldn't sustain weight.
Yes.
So one of the consequences of this is not only will this further delegitimize our academic institutions, it will further delegitimize the people. The corruption is so wide scale.
But this is coming from a sort of ideological group that believes that meritocracy is inherently a kind of racist idea.
Correct.
And that really what you need to prioritise is this idea of diversity, equity and inclusion.
That's correct.
Can you just explain very quickly what diversity, equity, inclusion is all about?
Diversity, equity, inclusion is taking the voices of people that have not been historically forwarded or have oppression variables, for example, the descendant of slaves, and giving equity, giving either a balance of a proportional representation. So if African Americans are 13% of the population, you have 13% of the population in a mix.
So what's wrong with that?
Well, let me just, so if you just looked at the data at Harvard, for example, what's wrong with that briefly is that it presupposes it's not a zero-sum game. So, for example, if there are 100 spots, and if you took the top 10% at Harvard, the Asians would be over 51% of applicants, but they're not. They're downgraded. If you're Asian, there is systematic discrimination. It's against Asians. Whites would drop a little bit. Hispanics would plummet, but African Americans would go from 2 or 3% to 0.9, under 1%. So the idea is that you match the percentage of people in a population racially. We take that demographic and graft it on.
So equality of outcome, not equality of opportunity.
Correct.
Okay.
And to achieve that, the only way to achieve that is wide-scale corruption.
Yeah.
And systemic discrimination against Ashkenazi Jews, for example, or cold climate Asians.
So yes, exactly. Racial groups that will just do better, it's harder for them to get into Harvard. That's right.
Well, correct, which you should just say this is not a meritocracy. We don't find the best people. We don't hire the best people.
Yes.
We hire people, we matriculate students on the basis of race.
Yes. And this is, of course, Claudine Gay's resignation was largely precipitated not just by the plagiarism, but by her saying in Congress that the idea of calling for genocide of Jews was context dependent, whether that would violate the hate policy.
The very same people who were freaking out about microaggressions and trigger warnings and safe spaces, and you can't even say where you're from. That's a microaggression. They have biased response teams. You could be brought up for a thought crime, basically, at my former employee, Portland State University. That they have weaponized offices of diversity, equity, and inclusion against people.
Well, they've been punishing people for microaggressions.
Oh, yeah.
But calling for the genocide of Jews, that depends on the context.
Well, yeah, you have to understand the ideology for that. The ideology is that Jews are not looked at an oppressed class, they're looked as white adjacent. And white adjacent you're looked at as the oppressor. And so you're part of the system that keeps down African Americans in specific, keeps certain people, certain racial groups from achieving, or sexual identity groups like trans.
So, in short, because I know we don't have much time, this is a massive topic.
It is a massive topic.
It feels as though what you're describing are institutions that are just no longer fit for purpose. They are no longer exercising the objectives that the universities were set out to achieve. They're now...
Well, that's probably the best thing you can say about it.
Right.
The best thing you can say about it is that they don't discharge their primary mission.
Yes.
The more honest thing to say about it is that there is a wide-scale endemic racism, and the infrastructure that supports that racism is fraud and corruption. And they know it, and they have to hide it.
So is it on the verge of collapse?
Well, it's on the verge of complete delegitimization. So they will have no legitimacy anymore.
Fascinating. No bad thing.
No, and it will come, my prediction is that it will come to the UK at Cambridge and Oxford in a year and a half.
Very interesting. Well, we don't have much time, unfortunately, so Peter Boghossian, thank you for joining us. And next, Free Speech Nation. Desperate for love. The Scottish National Party have come under fire for plans which could see parents sent to jail if they refuse to let their children self-identify. Lois McClatchy-Miller will be here to discuss that. Don't go anywhere.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Newsroom.
On Mark Dolan tonight, who's to blame for the post office scandal? Everyone you can think of. This story shames a generation of politicians and public figures. In my take at 10, love him or loathe him, Nigel Farage should be an MP in the House of Commons. It would serve our democracy well if he runs at the next election. Plus, the chairman of UKIP with a big announcement. TV News legend John Sargent and former government minister Anne Widdecombe. We're live at 9.
To Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. Parents are facing up to 7 years in jail if they don't let their children change gender under new plans put forward by the SNP. Scotland is looking at implementing a ban on conversion therapy, which would criminalise any actions designed to change or suppress the gender identity of another individual, and any action that causes another individual physical harm or psychological distress. So, here to discuss these proposals, I'm joined by Senior Legal Communications Officer at ADF and proud Scot, Lois McClatchy-Miller. So tell me, Lois, people are confused because the Scottish Government is saying they want to ban conversion therapy. We think of conversion therapy as hooking gay men up to electrodes back in the 1960s to force... You know, it's not the same thing, is it?
It's not the same thing. This bill is purported to be tackling these things, which are already illegal, and by good sense, of course. Yes. But what this bill really tackles is common sense parenting and guiding advice. This bill, as has hit the headlines, would indeed put parents at risk of going to prison for 7 years if they were to refuse their child a gender transition. One of the examples that were given in the text about such criminal behaviour would be if your child, say your 11-year-old son, comes down for school in the morning and he's dressed in a skirt, lipstick and heels, and you say, no, go and change, son, you're not going to be wearing that today. If you were to do that, to repeat it more than twice, then you too could be up for this criminal offence, separated from your children and facing 7 years in prison. So it's a very severe
Now, realistically, because a lot of people would look at that and think there's no way. There's no way a court would actually send a parent to prison for 7 years. Is it feasible?
According to the proposals that have been put out for a public consultation this week, that is indeed what would happen. It's interesting that 7 years, it has a kind of religious connotation, doesn't it? Christians think of 7 days that God made the world. I think it's Sikhism, there's 7 steps to prosperity, and now in Scottish wokeism, there's 7 years to go to jail if you refuse to transition your children.
It's certainly, I believe, a form of religious conviction, the woke movement. I do think there is something to that. But look, it does sound absolutely incredible. But parents who are trying to... I mean, we know from, for example, the Cass Review, that the idea of even social transitioning, as in adopting pronouns and names of a child which are not what they were given at birth, that actually that's not a neutral act. It can actually be quite a dangerous thing. All of the evidence is saying we shouldn't do that. So parents are being told, don't do that. And then the government is saying, but if you follow what the Cass Review and other experts say, you're breaking the law. Is that right?
It's absolutely crazy. So this allows state intervention into that relationship between parent and child in a really unprecedented way. And it follows this trajectory that has happened over the last few years in Scotland especially, but across the West, where adults are being treated as children, and children given the power to make decisions about their lives that adults should have. Parents should be empowered to be guiding children through this very tricky Generation Alpha. They have enough challenges as it is parenting, and now they're being scared to death. They're being separated from their children if they say something against what the government believes to be right. It's absolutely insane.
I don't want this to sound offensive, but what is it about Scotland? Because if you go back to... The Scottish Government were trying to implement that parent scheme where every child would have a named... sort of like an ambassador with the government, sort of get involved. I mean, that didn't go through.
That failed.
But they tried.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It follows a trajectory that just wants to intervene in that relationship between parent and child, and it doesn't make any sense at all. And remember, also, we had the hate speech law, which went past through Parliament a couple of years ago, also threatening 7 years in prison for even discussing these issues in a way that would be deemed illegal around a kitchen table.
Yes.
So the intervention is quite severe, but we are at the consultation phase. So it's really important that everybody across Scotland gets involved and respond to this consultation, which will allow them to have their voices heard and say every part of this bill is not welcome in Scotland. I should say also there's a criminal aspect to what this law would bring forward, but there's also a civil aspect. If you don't meet the threshold, but you might pose a risk of accidentally saying something potentially in the future that could be construed as this conversion therapy, there's a civil protection order that can be put in place too, which prevent somebody from meeting you at a specific place, say for example a church. So it's very, very far-reaching to say ahead of time that somebody might say something, and that should be criminalised.
I mean, this is just the definition of authoritarianism, isn't it?
It really is. I wish it was a joke, but it's sadly, satire becomes real life.
Absolutely horrific, but thank you so much for telling us about it and depressing us all. Lois, thanks for coming to the show. OK, well, next on Free Speech Nation, inappropriate jokes at the Golden Globes and an actor hits out at David Cameron. It's almost time for Social Sensations. Join us in a few minutes.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests, and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. So it's time for Social Sensations. That's the part of the show where we look at what's been going viral this week on social media. We're going to start with comedian Jim Gaffigan. Have I pronounced that right? Gaffigan, yeah, sounds right. He went viral this week with some surprising choice of material at the Golden Globes Awards. Let's have a listen.
I can't even believe I'm in the entertainment industry. I can't. You know, it's so unlikely. I'm from a small town in Indiana. I'm not a pedophile. You know, I don't know if that's a new category here, but...
Looks like a mixed response from the audience there, isn't it? It's made them feel a bit awkward.
Good.
Isn't that the point of comedy?
That's why I do it.
Yeah, it's what you do. You make your audience very awkward.
Yeah.
It's often more kind of awkward silence than laughter, which is what you're after.
Yeah, but I'm laughing. That's the important thing.
Exactly. But I mean, this is the same as when Ricky Gervais hosted the Golden Globes, and he really did have a go at them, and it was hilarious.
Yeah.
That's sort of what you want, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. Look, that is a funny joke.
Yeah.
Because just because they're a bunch of pedos.
They can't laugh at themselves. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? These are some of the most privileged and powerful people in the world.
Yeah.
They deserve to have a bit of a ribbing.
It's double funny. It's funny anyway, and then it's funny if they don't like it.
Yeah, exactly. That's true. OK, well, next up, we've got actor Alan Cumming, who's touched a nerve this morning when he hit out at Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron. Let's see what he said.
The person who took us out of Europe, and this is the person who is in charge of our foreign policy as a government. That's pretty terrifying, number one. Secondly, this man is saying that he believes that Rishi Sunak is a strong leader and has a huge brain.
OK, so often actors get involved in politics. He didn't take us out of Europe, of course. He campaigned quite vigorously to keep us in the EU, in fact. But no, the facts don't really matter here, do they?
Well, he said that Rishi Sunak's got a huge brain. I mean, he hasn't got a huge anything, has he? He's quite a petite gentleman. What was the question?
I don't think there was one. I think we're just commenting on what you saw. Any views?
Well, I've just given you my main view.
Yes. And I'm sure Rishi Sunak will thank you for it. What do you think, Josh?
I feel like he shouldn't dress like Jim Gaffigan's joke.
You're being very careful in the way that you talk. But, I mean, it's been very interesting because...
Because he's not from Minnesota at all.
Alan Cumming has been getting involved in these sort of political things quite a lot. And I saw him the other day, there was a clip going around of him talking about... he said, you know, Rishi Sunak has said that there's differences between men and women. How dare he?
Yeah.
I mean, that's bonkers, isn't it?
It is bonkers, and it's because once you're surrounded by people who say yes to you, you forget where reality is.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for sort of actors and celebrities having their opinions and saying, you know, I have a lot of them on the show, sort of.
Yeah.
But you know, it gets a bit boring when they know absolutely nothing about the subjects they're discussing.
Yeah, exactly. It's just kind of, oh, there you are, having your opinion. I don't know.
No, let them talk, but, you know, don't take them too seriously.
I don't have to act on it, but that's fair enough, isn't it? Because he's not a politician.
Well, OK, well, let's have I think we've got some time for some unfiltered dilemmas. Here's a dilemma from Katie. Katie has emailed in and said, I find myself questioning my marriage as my husband consistently delves into his extreme views, making politics the constant focus of our conversations. That's sexy.
And we said we weren't going to have any more about Josh's marriage.
Yeah, exactly.
I know.
Just text me directly, Katie.
The thing is, Katie hasn't said what the dilemma is there, but I assume it's that she's suggesting that her relationship is being spoiled by a constant emphasis on politics. What do you think about
this is what happens, isn't it? In every family, one person cares about politics the most.
Yes.
And it doesn't matter if, on average, they're not very political or a very political family. Somebody's got their rant on, and they're always going to out-rant everybody else.
Yeah, do people actually break up, though, over politics? I'm wondering.
Oh, yes.
Do they?
It's like, I don't know, it could be more like you know, like, oh, talk dirty to me. Oh, I'm going to vote Lib Dem.
Wow. All right, I think, because actually that's arousing me a bit, so let's move on. Let's just bring the show to a rapid close. But thank you so much for joining us on Free Speech Nation. This was the week when the Scottish Government continued its war on women. Elon Musk confirmed that cis is a slur, at least on Twitter or X. And we learned that children were buying anti-aging cream. Interesting. Thank you so much to my panel, Cressida and Josh, to all my guests this evening. If you want to join us live in the studio, be part of our wonderful audience, you can easily do that. Just go to www.sroaudiences.com. You can apply there. Come along, join us. Stay tuned, by the way. Mark Dolan tonight's coming up just after the break. Don't forget as well that Headliners is on every night at 11 o'clock. That's the late night paper preview show where comedians talk you through the next day's top news stories. That's every night at 11. Thanks so much for watching Free Speech Nation. I'll be seeing you next week.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, good evening. I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. We have a very cold week ahead of us, and that starts with Sunday night. Temperatures are set to plummet quite widely as skies clear. Any cloud across England and Wales drifting its way into the Channel, and underneath those starry skies we will see a widespread frost developing. Even in our upbuilt urban areas, temperatures as low as -2 or -3 degrees Celsius. With those frozen surfaces and showers pushing into the north, there is the risk of some icy stretches for Northern Ireland, Northern Scotland as we start off Monday morning. So do take care here when you are heading off to work. Best chance of seeing any snow on Monday is those regions exposed to the northerly winds. So again, at Northern Scotland, Northern Ireland, maybe some sleet showers for the west of Wales, southwest England, and a few snow showers skirting the coast of Yorkshire and down into Norfolk. But further inland, it is going to be dry with widespread sunshine, but still very cold. Temperatures only seeing highs of 1-2 degrees Celsius at best, feeling sub-freezing with those tight squeeze in the isobars down the east coast there. Our attention on Tuesday turns to this feature in the northwest. A change of wind direction to that northwesterly could bring some snow showers first thing in the morning to parts of northwest England. Then as this more organised area of rain moves its way in, we could see snowfall for northern central areas of Scotland and along on the Pennines as well. There's still some uncertainty in regards to the exact track of that system, so it is worth keeping up to date with the forecast. But the cold weather looks like it certainly will be staying with us throughout much of this week. Bye-bye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's